Hello, welcome to another edition of Musicview. I'm Timmy Sommer, and we're here tonight with a member of Orchestral Manoeuvres, Andy.
Hello, please.
Why don't you introduce yourself? There, I guess I just have.
Yeah, I'm Mr. McCluskey, one of the famous two.
One of the famous two. Who is the
Who
other?
are now four.
Who is the other famous two and the additional two?
Paul Humphreys is the original member, and the two new guys are Martin Cooper and Malcolm Holmes.
Now, I saw you last night at the Ritz, and I guess I've seen Orchestral Manoeuvres about 3 or 4 times now, and you really have a certain warmth, a really sort of openness and way of communicating that a lot of the other bands people try to lump in with you don't have. And I can't help thinking that all your shows in New York seem to have been really, really good. New York seems to be a really good city for you guys.
It's funny, actually, we were just saying before the show last night that we didn't feel we played a really good gig yet in New York, actually. I thought last night at the Ritz was perhaps just about the best we'd played. New York for us we always seem to be tired when we get to New York. We're either jet lagged or it's the end of a tour or something.
At what point are we now?
The end of the tour.
Yeah.
We just finished the tour of the States, the first time we've actually done more than just a couple of cities.
How long were you here?
Not that long, actually, only about 12 dates, because we still really can't command that large an audience anywhere other than sort of big cities and cities that have got sort of college radio stations, things like that have been playing us.
And I guess that's a good time to mention right now that Orchestral Manoeuvres have just released their first American album. It's a compilation of the first 2 albums.
Right.
And it's out on Epic, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not absolutely a straight compilation, because a lot of the tracks have been remixed, as is our want. We're sort of eternal sort of perfectionists, and the release of this album gave us the opportunity to do a couple of remixes and tried a few new things. So there's a few versions on there that appeared as singles, as remixes off the original album. So there's like the English single versions on the American LP.
Now, in sort of the way I've seen you criticize your own gigs, or your tendency to remix things, your Orchestral Manoeuvres seems to be a bit perfectionist.
Yeah, I mean we're seldom happy. I mean, like you say about the New York gigs. I mean, I'm sure, to all intents and purposes, they were fine gigs, but we always just thought, well, there's just this went wrong and that could have been better. And it's last night was I thought a really good gig for us. It was very, very loose. It was just nice and relaxed, and I was actually having fun on stage, because I think in the past I've always been a bit tense on stage in New York, but this time I was just determined to have fun. And a lot of it was the audience were really responsive. Every time we come to New York, I think we've built up a slightly larger following, and more people know more of the songs, not just Electricity or Enola Gay or something. And last night, the sort of, I felt the rapport with the audience was better. I felt much more in contact with the people. So
yeah. How has it been for the rest of the gigs in America, and how about how many of those
variable?
Yeah.
Again, I think places we'd played before, people understood a little bit more about the sort of performance we were going to put on. Everywhere we played, people had heard of us. We were mostly playing either colleges or sort of new wave clubs, for lack of a better word.
So you weren't playing sort of up a blind alley, the audiences.
Yeah, so most people had heard of us and had heard a few things, but again, I think a lot of them had maybe just heard the singles, and when we opened with something like Stanlow, maybe they suddenly think, oh god, it's going to be a sort of a Stone Still synthesizer show. But most nights we've eventually convinced people that it's not as painful as they might have thought it was going to be.
Yeah. It must be weird. How long ago did Souvenir come out?
In England, it's about 2 months.
Yeah, and did that do fairly well?
Got to number 3.
Yeah, I guess it's about as good as you can do. But it must be weird coming over from different places and other markets where you do well. Like you seem to do well all through Europe, at least chart-wise.
We're doing really well now, yeah.
And coming over somewhere here where either for one reason the audiences aren't that exposed or anything.
It's quite an understandable situation, really. I mean, we're not looking for rapid overnight success in the States. We're fully aware of the situation, and it's a situation that not only ourselves are in, but a lot of the English bands find that their audience is enthusiastic but limited. I mean, because the vast amount of America is just A, not interested in music, and B, doesn't get a chance to listen to it because most of the media sources they're commercially concerned, so they sort of take like the path of least resistance. They play music that people are going to listen to, so that their advertisers have got a large audience.
Yeah. Now we're going to hear a song right now from Orchestral Manoeuvres. We're going to hear Almost. Anything you'd like to say about it before we play it?
Well, no, I think this is one of the remixes on the album. This is if you play the American release version, it's a Martin Hannett version,
Yeah.
which is the first release version we had in England, but the one we put on the English album was a different version.
How much work have you done with Martin Hannett?
Just almost an Electricity. They were the ones that we did with him for Factory, because he's almost like the in-house producer at Factory, so he did the singles with us when we were on Factory.
Yeah.
And I think his Almost version is the best one because he's got the most echo on it, and it really suits the song. It makes it
You seem to
slushy.
to have done these with Martin Hannett before he really formed his sort of ego as a producer. You know, later on he got to a point where he seemed he was putting too much of his own stylistic influence on a band.
Well,
a certain point.
I don't know. I mean, I think even in the days when we worked with him, if you worked with Martin Hannett, you got Martin Hannett's sound. So, I mean, I think what Almost he did a treat on, but I mean, Electricity, the version that's available on the OMD album in America, is the second time he had a go at it, because we didn't like the first version. He put too much echo on it, too many effects. I mean, he loves his effects units, and they suit a band perhaps like Joy Division, who had a fairly Spartan sort of sound,
Yeah.
so he could fill up the gaps with all his echoes and effects and things. But Electricity needed to be a sort of a much cleaner mix, and we eventually got one out of him by sending him back into the studio.
Okay then, so this is Orchestral Manoeuvres with Almost. Almost from Orchestral Manoeuvres, and we're here right now with Andy from OMD on Musicview. Something you said before about the Joy Division. One of the notes I took last night at the show was that I got the impression that you sort of conveyed the warmth and emotion and the ability to use that the way I imagine Joy Division would have if I'd ever gotten the chance to see them, you know, or if that.
Well, it's hard for us to say. I mean,
Yeah.
we did play gigs with Joy Division. I know what Joy Division used to be like on stage with Ian Curtis. I wouldn't like to begin to say that we could in any way emulate them, because I mean, they were amazing on stage.
It seemed to be sort of
yeah, I mean, I think we do have a lot of songs that have strong emotions in them, and whilst I mean on stage it's the umpteenth time we've performed them, and it does get rather a ritual if you're not careful. I mean, yeah, I get into the songs, and I think some of the feelings come out. I mean, we certainly don't stand there doing robot impersonations, which is perhaps what people might expect from synthesizer bands.
Yeah.
Or bands that play synthesizers. I don't like being called a synthesizer band.
Now, backtracking a bit, how did your relationship with Paul start, and the relationship that led to Orchestral Manoeuvres?
We were at school together. We live in the same little suburb of part of Liverpool area, and we only live about 400 yards apart. So we knew each other for a long time, and musically it wasn't until we were about 16 we started playing together when some friends of Paul's...
Talking about 4 or 5 years ago?
16, oh no, gas, nearly 6 years ago now. I'm getting old. And so I met Paul through his friends, really, but it soon became aware that myself and Paul had more in common than any of our friends around, and I think for ages we just sort of worked together as a hobby, really, and we played with these other guys in bands, but we grew up together, really, just sort of kicking things around, and really, I mean, OMD is an extension of those early days, really. It's just Andy and Paul sort of having fun. It's still a bit of an extended hobby.
Yeah. When did you begin to start playing either live or start recording? Because didn't you have something to do with a label Martin Rushton tried to set up about 2 or 3 years ago?
No.
Genetic Records?
No, we didn't.
Oh.
We were nothing to do with them.
Oh, because I guess that's something he said to us once. Oh, all right.
No, well, I don't ever remember being approached by him or anything.
Yeah.
So.
Now, when did you first? The first single was Electricity.
Yeah, on Factory Records.
And
that was summer of '79.
Yeah, and from then in, it was the album recorded about.
That was in December and released in early '80.
Yeah.
So it's. I mean, we've only been. We've only had records out for 2 years.
Yeah.
It's. Once we'd left Factory, we moved to Dindisc Records, which was like set up by Virgin Records, but they're actually nothing to do with Virgin, theoretically, anyway.
I remember reading some early account. You were talking about your earlier gigs, just saying that you used to play with a tape recorder.
Yeah, it was just the two of us. It was just myself and Paul and a tape recorder on stage.
And was this up in Liverpool?
Yeah, I mean, we started off in Liverpool. We played at a great little club called Eric's, where
the whole myth that sprung up around.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a lot
of
of Liverpool bands that are now sort of getting national and sort of worldwide. reputation, like Teardrops and Echo and the Bunnymen, that they all started down at Eric's. It was a great place because it gave people a chance. They had a real sort of forward-looking attitude, and they used to run, especially every Thursday night, local band nights where they didn't pay you anything, which was fair enough.
But it gave you the chance.
But again,
gig.
it was a prestigious club, and it gave you a chance to say, we'd play Eric's, and they were booking into other clubs around the region, and they put us into the Factory in Manchester, which was like a venue associated with Factory Records, and that's where we first sort of met Tony Wilson and the people that ran Factory Records. So it was a really good point to kick off from. I think without playing at Eric's, we probably wouldn't be going now, because it was only going to be our first ever gig, and it was through playing there that we bumped into a few contacts that gave us more gigs, and it gradually kept expanding. So without that place, I don't suppose we'd be here now.
It seems that Factory sort of brought a very sort of aesthetic sensibility to either making records or producing records. They're very sort of keen on good packaging and good graphics, and the music also sort of had that same sort of aesthetic sense to it.
I think it did originally. I mean, without saying the wrong things, since we're not on Factory Records anymore, I do. It has struck me recently that they haven't found anything that's perhaps been as strong as some of their early stuff. I remember the early gigs we used to play. There was ourselves and Certain Ratio and Joy Division, which was a pretty sort of interesting package, really. But back in early '79, and maybe it reflects there's not a lot going on in England at the moment, which sounds like a contradiction because everybody seems to think that England's the centre of the universe when it comes to music at the moment.
Yeah.
But I think there's a lot of very rapid fads happening in England, but I don't think there's anything that's going to last more than a year at the moment. And I think that's why our record label hasn't signed anybody new recently, and Factory haven't seemed to have come up with anything new. And I think it's perhaps a reflection that whilst there's lots of little fads and fashions happening, I don't think there's anything concrete happening.
Dindis seems to have a very sort of more diverse kind of artist than Factory did. Whether it be anyone from the Revillas or... Yeah,
I mean, they've actually dropped a few of their artists recently, and they had. It was a good label. I'm glad we ended up on Dindis because it was somewhere between the Factory Records and the large corporation, because they have the wheels to get into motion, the selling of the records and the promotion of stuff, which, like it or not, you actually do need to sell records. You need to have the machinery behind you, even if you're on an independent. I mean, even like the UB40s on Graduate Records, for example, I mean, they still distribute through big companies, so you do need that power. And yet Dindis, with having that, they're still a small company. They still have a small staff, and we know them all. In fact, all their staff bar one are actually in New York at the moment seeing us, so it's almost like a family, really.
Yeah. I don't know exactly where it is. I read it or something, but a comment you said just a little while ago. Now, Messages is, any way you look at it, just a really sort of delightful pop song. I mean, you're not embarrassed to use that word, or?
No.
Now, recently, did you say something like, we're from here on in, we're going to leave the pop songs to Depeche Mode?
Oh, yeah.
Did you say something like that?
Yeah, it was something that passed through my mind. I just sometimes get a bit... I think not least I get a bit fed up with the fact that people do seem to expect from us a lot of the sort of, if you like, the lightweight, which is not the right word because it's sort of that...
Because your lyrics have never been lightweight.
No,
your attitude has never been.
It's that's sort of the lighter side, like the pop melody, basically pop synth songs, if you like, which in some ways have characterised what we've released on single, and I think a large section of the public seem to view us as being that and only that. And it was just something that crossed my mind, that I was getting a bit fed up, because I did feel that we were getting stereotypes as a band that was only that, and that was what we did best. And I mean, for example, Souvenir, which is the first sort of slower tempo single we've released, got slammed by everyone in England, largely because I think it didn't live up to the expectation. It wasn't what OMD are supposed to sound like. And the next single we're releasing in England,
if you've been following the LPs, you know, Souvenir was fairly consistent with, you know.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't
because people had said to me, this is a dramatic change, and it wasn't. You know?
Yeah, I mean, if you listen to the LPs, you know, then we are capable of slowing down and not losing our impact. But so I know that was just a sort of passing phrase of something that crossed my mind at the time when I was just feeling a little disgruntled with perhaps the way I felt some people were treating us. And we are changing our sound. I don't think we're not using quite so many of the immediate synthesizer melodies. Our melodies are now longer and more drawn out, and we're using rather than sort of the light, if you like, delicate sort of melodies of the synthesizer, we're using string melodies and choral melodies and things. We've got a mellotron which works off tapes, and that seems to be sort of featuring heavily. So our sound is changing away from synth pop, if you like.
And did you mention that you have finished another album? Or?
We have indeed finished another album, which Epic, I think, are going to release in December in the States. We just finished it in England just before we flew out. That's one of the reasons why we are, in fact, unable to play too many new songs on stage at the moment, because we actually haven't had a chance to rehearse them.
Yeah, you did one.
We did one last night, which is called She's Leaving,
which was just terrific. I should mention here now. But, when should we be seeing this album?
In the States, I think it's early December, which is actually sort of nearly simultaneous with the English release. So people shouldn't have to go out and search for imports if they can afford to wait a month or so. They'll get the American release.
And you just mentioned in passing that a new single is on the way. Or?
There's another new single in England. Souvenir is on the album. And there's another single just coming out in England soon called Joan of Arc. One of two songs on the album called Joan of Arc.
Yeah.
It became our Fascination of the Year, like the Enola Gay was last year. I think it's an interesting album. There's a lot of flaws on it because we've tried to do things that we haven't done before, and so we've fallen down in a couple of places. But it is interesting, and you like She's Leaving. Souvenirs obviously proved very popular, so I think it's going to...
There'll be enough there that if people want to latch on to what they...
I think so. But I think there'll probably be enough there for it to draw a lot of flack from a lot of people as well. So we shall see. Something
I wish we had more time sort of to talk about is your lyrical content, which isn't exactly what you would expect either out of the melodies or out of, any... I think because so few people, while they were on the dance floor, really understood exactly what was going on in Enola Gay. What the song was about.
It was a shame in a sense. I mean, we've always been at pains in interviews and things to mention that it was actually the name of the aeroplane that dropped the atom bomb on Hiroshima. Not that we're sort of anti-nuclear crusaders or anything, but we did feel that it was important for people to know that. I mean, even in England and where it was a hit, I think a lot of people just thought it was some sort of warped love song or something, and so
the same was sort of true of Electricity. I was pointing out to Sal last night that the lyrics to
there's little messages and little things in it. We don't like being really, really explicit, but we just throw things around. I mean, a lot of the songs actually they're not directly narrative because there's contradictions within them in a lot of the songs, and I mean, Electricity is not just a sort of narrative reeling off of how wonderful and futuristic electricity is. It has little comments and things in it. But as you say, I don't suppose people do listen to it. I mean, a lot of people seem to consider Electricity as some sort of like anthem type thing to the future, to electronic music in general, which it's not really. It's just one little song out of our repertoire, which in itself has a sort of diversity of content.
We're going to hear one more now from OMD. This one's Souvenir, which, as you said, was the latest single coming out about 2 months ago, reached number 3 on the British charts.
I suppose another different thing about it is it was actually written by Paul, mostly.
Right.
Paul and Martin.
It was your first A-side sung by Paul, is it? Or?
Yeah, he did. I mean, we obviously write together a lot, and he wrote one on his own on the last album. But this time it was written by himself and Martin Cooper, the other keyboard player and sax player in the band.
Now, a friend of mine told me this did very well in Israel. All places.
Souvenir in Israel?
Yeah. It was top 10.
It might have been in Enola Gay. I don't think Souvenir's been out anywhere other than England and France yet.
Yeah.
I mean, it's done really well in England, and it seems to be looking good in France. But it's a nice song. I mean, that's all you can say about it. It's nice. It's really sort of wraps itself around you. It's got some nice sounds in it, some choral bits and things.
Can I ask why you don't perform this live, or at least you didn't last night?
Souvenir?
Yeah.
We simply still haven't learned to play it yet. I mean, it was recorded in advance of the album, but the minute we finished it, we went back to work on the album, and it's part of our problem really, that our main priority is the writing and the creation of the songs. and then it becomes our second problem to have to learn to play them on stage. And so in the studio they are written sort of bit at a time, and mainly just myself and Paul will write them, and then we have to teach the rest of the band and teach ourselves, to play the whole thing as a unit, and it's often quite difficult, and that's why we have to employ tapes and things still on stage now.
Okay, so this is OMD with Souvenir. Souvenir from OMD on Musicview. Now, I know we just have another minute, but I'm dying to ask one question, and that's, every time, all 4 times you've been here, I've wondered this. Why do you play your bass upside down?
Well, the bass is normal way up, but the strings are upside down. Simple reason. When I was 16 and I wanted to buy a bass guitar, on my birthday I just sort of scraped together all the money I'd been given as presents. I went down the local second-hand shop to get one, and the only one I could find for the money I had was left-handed. So I just learnt upside down, and then when I had my original left-handed bass stolen, I started to revert to right-handed basses with the strings turned upside down. So it affects my playing. It does make me play in a certain style, a certain manner, which is in some ways sort of characteristic of Orchestral Manoeuvres.
Is it difficult teaching your keyboard player who doubles on bass on 1 or 2 songs? Did he have a hard time learning to play like that?
He did. It's not a hard line he plays, but it is disorientating for him because he can play guitar.
It's disorientating to watch.
Yeah, I know that the higher you go, the higher you go, instead of like the bass is at the top and the trebles at the bottom. It's completely the other way around. I mean, I can't now play a normal bass. I used to be able to play a bass strung the normal way up, but I couldn't do it now. I get really, really confused. I play guitar the normal way up though, which gets a bit hairy sometimes. But no, the one song that Martin plays is Julia's song, which in good old OMD tradition has only got 5 bass notes in it all the way through, and they're just a repeating pattern. So it's not too difficult. He's almost sort of learnt it parrot fashion. He couldn't play anything else upside down, but he knows how to play that one.
We should mention that Orchestral Manoeuvres do have an album out in America right now. It's just called OMD, or whatever it's called, and you will have another album out about December.
One called Architecture and Morality. Nice pretentious title.
Is it going to have the same nice artwork you've had in the last year?
It's a funny piece of artwork, actually. It's very, very simple. There's no picture on the front. There's an inner liner with a picture on. There's a hole cut on the front for it, but it's a very, very simple.
And you're in your tradition of 3-dimensional covers.
Well, no. I mean, it's nothing quite as visually spectacular as the original English things that did come over here on import with all the lovely holes cut in.
That's terrific.
But I suppose, like the album itself, it'll probably prove unpopular with people who are getting used to a sort of classical OMD visual style. It's a change. Savile's looking to do something new because a lot of people are copying Peter Savile's style in England. I mean, you pick up a paper like The Enemy or something, and every other advert for a record or something looks like a Peter Savile advert. Did he do the Bunnymen cover, or is that an imitation too? No, the guy that did the Bunnymen cover used to work with Peter Savile. Yeah, because that's the same style. Yeah, well, I don't think we have time really to talk about it. Will you be around? Will you be back in the States when the new album comes out? I'm sure Epic will twist our arm to come over here. Yeah. We've got a lot of commitments in England and Europe first of all, but well, I mean, our biggest audience over here is Canada actually, so we'll probably be coming here for Canada, and no doubt. I mean, even if we only tour Canada, we'll definitely do a gig in New York because we need the money. Yeah. All right. Okay. So I guess that's about wraps up. I really wish we had more time for this. That's okay. I'm Timmy Sommer. I've been here with Andy McCluskey of Orchestral Manoeuvres. This has been another edition of Musicview. Good night.